On a cold Toronto night, Daniel Brooks, a struggling mechanic drowning in frustration, made a choice that would destroy everything he loved. Behind the wheel sat his best friend, Ryan Miller, a newly promoted engineer with a bright future and a fiancée named Emma Collins waiting for him at home. When Daniel's drunken drive ended in tragedy, the city was left in shock. Detective Sarah Holden led the investigation that exposed every reckless decision, while Ryan's mother, Linda Miller, fought for justice in her son's name. What began as a night of celebration soon turned into a haunting story of guilt, loss, and redemption. The night began with celebration and laughter echoing through the streets of downtown Toronto. Daniel Brooks and Ryan Miller had been inseparable since high school. Two best friends who had faced everything together, from teenage mischief to adult milestones. That evening, they gathered at a busy bar on King Street to celebrate Ryan's promotion at his new engineering firm. The air buzzed with chatter, clinking glasses, and upbeat music. Daniel was the loudest of them all, his grin wide and eyes glassy from the drinks he had consumed. He was proud of Ryan, but deep inside, a shadow lingered, an unspoken jealousy that had been growing for years. Ryan's career was taking off. His engagement to Emma made headlines on their social media, and his life seemed perfectly aligned. Daniel, on the other hand, was struggling to keep his small business afloat, often drowning his frustration in alcohol. As the night wore on, Ryan suggested they call a cab, but Daniel waved him off, claiming he was fine. Friends at the table exchanged uneasy glances. Daniel had always been reckless when drunk, but he was stubborn. He hated being told what to do. Around midnight, they stumbled out of the bar into the chilly Toronto air. Streetlights shimmered on the slick pavement after a recent drizzle, painting the world in reflections of gold and silver. Daniel jingled his car keys in his hand, laughing as Ryan followed behind him. Ryan hesitated, suggesting they wait a bit, but eventually he gave in. It was Daniel, after all, his best friend, his brother in all but blood. The drive started off calm. The roads were mostly empty, the city glowing with neon signs and traffic lights stretching into the distance. Music played faintly from the car's speakers, a nostalgic song from their teenage years. But soon, Daniel's foot grew heavy on the accelerator. The car surged forward, the speed climbing faster than Ryan expected. He shifted uneasily, glancing at Daniel's face illuminated by the dashboard lights. Daniel laughed, oblivious to the danger, his confidence growing with every sip of the leftover beer in the cup holder. The last thing witnesses remembered was the black sedan swerving erratically before slamming into the concrete barrier on Lakeshore Boulevard. The screech of tires and the thunderous crash shattered the silence of the early morning. The impact crumpled the front of the car like paper. The airbags deployed, smoke rising from the engine as the city lights flickered in the distance. Ryan was motionless in the passenger seat, his head turned unnaturally to the side. Daniel was dazed, bleeding, calling out for his friend in a broken voice that barely carried through the wreck. When paramedics arrived minutes later, the scene was grim. Ryan was pronounced dead instantly. Daniel, still conscious, was rushed to the hospital. The officers noted the smell of alcohol thick in the air. Hours later, as he lay in his hospital bed, Daniel learned the truth. His best friend was gone, and he was the reason. The celebration had ended in tragedy. The morning after the crash, Toronto awoke to headlines that sent ripples of shock through the city. Man killed in suspected drunk driving crash, best friend behind the wheel. The image of the mangled car on Lakeshore Boulevard filled every news feed. Daniel Brooks' name was everywhere, once just another face in the crowd, now branded as the drunk driver who took his best friend's life. He sat in the hospital bed motionless, staring at the sterile white wall as the news played faintly on the television. The words felt distant, as if they were describing someone else. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ryan's face. The flash of panic, the blur of lights, the silence after the crash. Detective Sarah Holden was assigned to the case. She had seen plenty of drunk driving incidents before, but this one hit differently. The tragedy of a friendship destroyed by one reckless choice drew public sympathy and anger alike. She visited Daniel in the hospital 2 days after the crash. His injuries were minor compared to what he had caused. Some cuts, a fractured wrist, a bruised rib, Sarah's tone was calm but firm as she asked her questions, noting his slurred responses and distant gaze. Toxicology results confirmed what everyone already suspected. Daniel's blood alcohol level was nearly double the legal limit. Meanwhile, Ryan's family was shattered. His fiancée, Emma Collins, hadn't spoken publicly yet, but her silence screamed louder than any words could. The funeral was held in a small church just outside Toronto. It was filled with friends, family, and co-workers, all mourning a man whose life had been cut short just as it was beginning to flourish. Daniel wasn't allowed to attend. He watched the service later online, tears streaming down his face as Ryan's mother clutched her son's photo and sobbed. The guilt consumed him, wrapping tighter around his chest each day. Public outrage began to grow. Online forums were filled with comments condemning Daniel's actions. Some demanded the maximum sentence. Others shared their own stories of loss caused by drunk drivers. What hurt Daniel most were the words from people who once called him a friend. Those who said they never wanted to see him again. He had always thought of himself as careless, maybe irresponsible, but never dangerous. Now, his name carried a weight he couldn't bear. A week later, Daniel was officially charged with impaired driving causing death and criminal negligence. He was released on bail under strict conditions. No alcohol, no driving, and weekly check-ins with the authorities. He returned to his apartment, which now felt like a prison. Ryan's belongings were still there. Old photos, concert tickets, a framed picture from their graduation day. Each item was a reminder of the life he had destroyed. At night, he couldn't sleep. The crash replayed endlessly in his mind. The laughter before it, the sharp sound of the tires, the sight of Ryan motionless beside him. He wondered if he deserved to live at all. Outside, the world moved on. But for Daniel Brooks, time had frozen on that cold Toronto night. The courtroom felt colder on the day of sentencing. Weeks of testimony, forensic analysis, and emotional statements had built to this moment. The atmosphere was heavy, almost suffocating, as family members filled the seats once again. Outside, a crowd had gathered, some holding signs against drunk driving, others just curious to glimpse the man whose recklessness had taken a life. Inside, Daniel Brooks sat motionless beside his lawyer, his hands clasped tightly as though he could hold himself together with sheer force. The judge's voice echoed through the silence, each word carving deeper into Daniel's conscience. Before the verdict, Ryan's mother took the stand to read her victim impact statement. Her voice trembled as she spoke, describing her son's laughter, his kindness, his plans for a future that would never come. Every word pierced Daniel like glass. When she spoke of Emma, her son's fiancée, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Emma sat rigid, staring straight ahead, her expression unreadable. She had refused to make a statement, but her silence carried more weight than any speech could. When it was Daniel's turn to address the court, his voice shook. He didn't try to defend himself. There were no excuses left to give. He spoke only of regret, of the unbearable emptiness that haunted him every morning he woke up and remembered that Ryan wasn't alive. He told the court that not a day passed when he didn't wish it had been him instead. His lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, but the gesture felt meaningless. Nothing could change what had been done. The judge's decision came after a long pause. Daniel was sentenced to 7 years in prison for impaired driving causing death and criminal negligence. The courtroom was silent save for the quiet sobs of Ryan's family. 7 years. Some thought it was too little, others too much. But for Daniel, it felt like a lifetime. As officers led him out, he looked back one last time. Emma's eyes met his briefly, filled not with hatred, but with something worse, pity and sorrow. That look would stay with him forever. Prison was a different world entirely. The clang of metal doors, the constant noise, the endless repetition of days, all of it blurred together. But nothing compared to the loneliness. Daniel spent hours replaying that night in his head, searching for the exact moment when he could have stopped it all. He found a strange kind of punishment in remembering every detail. The sound of Ryan's voice, the song playing on the radio, the crash, the silence. Each recollection felt like another sentence on top of the one he was already serving. Occasionally, he received letters from people affected by drunk driving, some forgiving, others condemning. He read them all. Detective Sarah Holden visited him once, years later, to tell him that Ryan's family had set up a foundation in his memory, a program to raise awareness about impaired driving. She said Emma was leading it. Daniel nodded quietly, knowing that she was turning pain into purpose, while he was left to carry the weight of his actions. Every night before lights out, Daniel would stare at the small window above his bed, the faint glow of the outside world reminding him of the life he'd destroyed. The walls were unyielding, but his guilt was the real prison, one that would never set him free. 7 years passed slowly, each day marking another reminder of what Daniel Brooks had lost and what he could never regain. Prison changed him in ways he hadn't expected. The first year had been nothing but raw torment, a constant loop of guilt and grief that refused to fade. But as time crawled forward, he began to face his mistakes head-on. He joined counseling sessions for offenders, listened to others speak about their regrets, and finally began to speak about his own. Each time he said Ryan's name aloud, it hurt less, but never enough to stop the ache completely. In his final years behind bars, Daniel started volunteering in programs that educated inmates about drunk driving and personal accountability. He would stand before small groups, his voice steady but eyes full of pain, recounting that night in detail: the drinks, the laughter, the arrogance, and the irreversible silence that followed. His story often left the room quiet. Some inmates dismissed it. Others listened intently, but Daniel didn't care about their reactions. He wasn't looking for redemption. He was simply trying to make sure no one else made the same mistake he did. When his release date finally came, Toronto looked different. The skyline had grown taller, the streets busier, the world faster. But for Daniel, everything felt muted. He was 40 now, a man with a haunted past and nowhere to go. He moved into a small apartment provided by a rehabilitation program for ex-offenders. The walls were bare, the air stale, but it was freedom, a kind of fragile freedom he didn't think he deserved. He often walked by the lakeshore where the accident had happened, standing quietly by the guardrail that had once twisted under the force of his car. People passed him by without recognizing who he was, and he preferred it that way. One afternoon, while visiting a community center that hosted awareness workshops, Daniel saw a poster that stopped him cold. It was for the Ryan Miller Foundation Against Impaired Driving. Beneath the logo was a quote from Ryan's mother: "Forgiveness begins where understanding starts." He hesitated for a long time before entering the building. Inside, displays showed photos of crash victims, stories from families, and educational material for teens. Toward the back of the room stood Emma Collins, older now, her expression composed but kind. She saw him almost instantly, their eyes locking for the first time in years. No words were exchanged, but in that brief moment, something shifted. There was no anger in her gaze, only quiet acceptance. Daniel understood then that forgiveness wasn't a gift he could ask for. It was something he had to earn by living differently. He left the center feeling lighter than he had in years. As months went on, Daniel continued to volunteer, sharing his story at schools and youth programs across Ontario. Each time he spoke, he mentioned Ryan's name with honor, not guilt. He would never erase what he'd done, but he could make sure Ryan's death had meaning beyond tragedy. In the end, Daniel Brooks became the kind of man his best friend had always believed he could be. Not perfect, not redeemed, but responsible. And as the sun set over Toronto's skyline, he finally allowed himself to breathe again, knowing that some lessons come only through unbearable loss. The story of Daniel Brooks and Ryan Miller stands as a painful reminder of how one reckless decision can destroy multiple lives in a single moment. What began as a night of celebration ended in unimaginable loss, regret, and irreversible consequences. Daniel's years in prison could never bring Ryan back, but they forced him to confront the truth of his actions and the deep cost of negligence. Through grief, Emma Collins and Linda Miller turned their pain into purpose, creating awareness to prevent others from repeating the same mistake. In the end, forgiveness didn't erase the past. It gave meaning to it. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe For more powerful true crime documentaries, turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story where tragedy meets truth. And tell us in the comments, do you believe people like Daniel Brooks deserve a second chance after a mistake that costs a life? Your thoughts keep these stories alive.